The studios didn't go bidding on it because they said, well, what's it going to be about? Here's this middle-aged lawyer with 2 kids. There's no romance. There's no violence, except off screen. There's no action. What is there? Where's the story? We sent the book to Greg, and he said yes immediately. I mean, instant.
Thank you.
I read through the book, and I could hardly wait until the next morning to call him and say, if you want me, I'm your boy. I felt a close identification with the characters, with the story, with the social problem, with the father and children. I somehow felt it was something that I had to do.
There's a reason why he was right for Atticus Finch, because they share a lot of the same qualities.
I think the next step was to find out who could write it. And it didn't take much debating about who should do it, because I knew Horton, and Horton knew that world. And actually, Horton resisted it for a time. He loved the book, and he was concerned about adapting a work he admired so much.
Alan brought Harper over to where I was living then in Nyack, and I don't know how she felt, but it was love at first sight on my part. And I just somehow felt that we were members of the same family.
He trusted us, that the book would not be emasculated in some way or changed, that we would honor the book and be true to the book.
Of course, it was Pakula I worked with during the script process, and he was passionately devoted to this script, to this novel, passionately.
Horton at that time lived up in Nyack in this wonderful old Victorian house right above the Hudson River. And there we were in this idyllic Victorian house looking at the kids playing down in the yard below, just as the kids of Mockingbirg played. The Southern man's house. And then we would go down and have dinner, Southern dinner with all that collard greens and all that stuff I'd never had before. Mockingbird type food.
When I was given the novel, there were 2 things that helped me a great deal. And one is, Alan said, I think it would be interesting to rethink the structure of the novel, to try to bring everything into the focus of a year.
School finally ended, and summer came, and so did Dill. Good morning.
Then a review called Scout in the Wilderness showed the roots of Scout towards Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, and it just opened the whole thing for me. I don't know, it's one of those things that's very helpful to a writer.
Harper was delighted with the screenplay, and it all seemed to flow. It seemed to be a kind of natural. I feel that the time they called me and said they had a book for me to read was one of the luckiest days of my life, really.
Let's go out. No, Deal. He wouldn't like that. Deal.
The hard thing, of course, was casting the children.
I said, let's find kids with kids. And obviously we wanted to hunt in the South, really look for kids in the South. So we started a search. There was a young woman at the time, Bodie Boatwright. She's from the South. We put her in charge of this search. And I don't know how many kids she saw, but she went all through the South.
There's a director here, was a director here in town, who directed Town and Gown Theater here, James Hatcher. He called my mother and said, you need to take Philip to this audition. So she asked me if I wanted to go to the audition, and I said no. And she said, well, you get out of school for half a day, and I said, okay. He is also the person who called Mary's mother.
Now, I had never done any acting. So my girlfriend and I had both gone down to interview for this thing. We got up on the stage and they said, well, do you have something prepared or whatever? And I said, no, you know. So we just got up and, I vaguely remember something about chopping some wood or something and doing, I don't know what. It's kind of silly, something that we just made up at the moment.
And then about a month later, or maybe less, 2 weeks later, we got a call to go to New York for a screen test, which was a big deal.
They both came from Birmingham, Alabama, and they both had the quality that I was looking for. They were bright, they were alive, they seemed to have active imaginations.
And so both children come from 4 blocks from each other, and we didn't know each other, of course. I was 13, she was 9. We wouldn't have known each other.
They looked as if they could be brother and sister, that the facial contours and coloring and all of it just seemed to work.
We went down to Monroeville thinking that we might make the picture there. And that's how I was able to meet her father, who was a real-life model for Atticus Finch. And he was amused. First of all, he was amused that his tomboy daughter grew up to be a Pulitzer Prize winner. And then he was even more amused by the Hollywood types who barged into his hometown.
I'm Alabama bound. I'm Alabama bound. I'm Alabama bound. I'm Alabama bound.
Any voyage to Alabama runs the risk of contact with the natives. At first, it might be hard to detect the roots running deep and wild. But the fog quickly lifts. Whatever the color or persuasion, home in Alabama is an act of Promethean intoxication.
Before integration really took hold, as we say, in Alabama, I was in a cantata or a play that had music with it, and it was about Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver, and it adapted as a musical piece portions of Booker T. Washington's 1896 Atlanta Exposition speech. And one of the famous lines from that speech is a part of a story, and it says, "Cast down your bucket where you are." And that, I remember even thinking at the time, kind of captured my family's feeling about Alabama. It was home, it was our place, and we would cast down our buckets where we were.
Facades, by natural law, must change, even in Southwest Alabama. No one should understand this better than Hollywood folks. Only they almost certainly could not imagine either the significance of indoor plumbing or the so-called improvements injected by the WPA, WW2, or whatever W had government footing the bill.
If you look at my store, the sidewalks around the square were paved before the streets, and I think it was done by Chamber of Commerce or a junior Chamber of Commerce. But the streets around the square in Monroe were paved somewhere about 1935.
The town had changed radically after World War II. A lot of the old buildings came down. There was a lot of corrugated iron up and modern looks to buildings and big plate glass stores. And it just didn't have the feel of the small town. There were small pockets here and there where you could put a camera and get an angle and say, you know, there it is. A few houses, but it just didn't work. The courthouse was good to look at, and we used essentially the same architecture of the interior of that courthouse.
This court's now in session. Everybody rise.
Harper Lee visited the set and was stunned in that it looked so much like a southern town, like her town. To be able to produce that look and that feel on a back lot at Universal Pictures in Hollywood. I have to credit the production designer on it with so much of that look and that feel, and that's Henry Bumstead. Somehow he discovered that there was a small town out in the San Fernando Valley that was about to be destroyed, and those houses all had the look of the southern homes. And he took and placed and built them, carved out a street, and there we were in Macon.
Two things beyond the film itself that added to this film and pointed you in the right direction were Elmer Bernstein's score and the title sequence. We called Steve Frankfurt to design the titles, and Bob and I talked to him about, trying to get the mysterious world of childhood, the secret world of childhood. It starts out with just this little girl humming. And there's no music. And then as one marble hits another marble, as I recall, suddenly the music starts. And it was magical, and bam, you were